Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Over more than 3 decades of reform and opening up, China has witnessed enormous changes in terms of social governance, rule of law, public participation, and decentralization of power. As China becomes more integrated with the rest of the world, the country is evolving from unity to diversity and is faced with increasing tests, both politically and economically. With that in mind, the recently concluded 6th Plenum of the 18th CPC Central Committee vowed to strengthen inter-party supervision and inter-party democracy in the coming years. What is likely to be the new dynamics of the governance of the party and the country? And how would that impact the political future of the country? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very pleased to be joined by Jiang Wenran, Global Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars, and Zhang Raos, Senior Fellow with the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at the Renmin University of China. But first, let's take a look at those.
The Communist Party of China has concluded its 6th plenum of the 18th Central Committee in Beijing. It issued 2 documents specifying new norms of party political life and new regulations to strengthen party supervision and discipline. The plenum stressed party unity, calling on all members to unite closely around the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping as the core, a new and meaningful designation, while recognizing the importance of collective leadership.
President Xi Jinping's speech draws up an important plan to strengthen and regulate the political life within the party and consolidate inter-party supervision. It makes specific requirements on better jobs in various fields in the party and the country, and proposes innovative new thoughts, ideas, and conclusions.
The country's robust anti-corruption campaign was a major topic of the plenum, with names named and warnings given. Leaders approved a series of stricter standards of political behavior and tougher regulations of supervision and enforcement. It comes at a time of expanding membership and rapid and profound social transformation. Delegates said they would address election malpractice and put an end to the buying and selling of official posts and vote rigging. The Communist Party of China holds a plenary session at least once a year in Beijing to develop policies and make key decisions.
Welcome back to the discussion here. Over the past 3 decades, the 6 plenums have always focused on ideology and party building. With the rapid social and economic development here in China, what do you read into the CPC's emphasis on party building at the moment? And what does party building really mean to the West?
Well, party building in China got its very specific context over the time. And obviously in recent years, I can see the trend as gradual and more institutionalization. And at least in the post-Mao era, I think from Deng Xiaoping onward, the party has been emphasizing collective leadership, more and more supervision of this party apparatus, with the number of the party members expanding over the years. So I think in the Chinese context, I can see the anti-corruption campaign, the more disciplinary committee authorities coming from the West, looking from Canada, where I teach Chinese politics over the years, and I see these changes are gradual but deepening over the years. It's definitely not the party of 1970s anymore, even not 1980s or 1990s. Things have changed quite a lot. Yeah.
John, out of 1.3 billion population, we have 88 million party members. Man, this is a big number. Size matters, doesn't it? What does it mean to you personally in terms of strengthening governance of the party? And that's what we call the party building.
Well, I think that it just means that the Communist Party of China is the nucleus of the country. That was what I took to be the false analysis which was made in the West previously. There was a scenario which was made in the West, which was that the Communist Party would be marginalised, is to put it much too strongly, but things would be run more centrally through the government. The role of the Communist Party would become less. clearly my view of the situation under Xi Jinping has gone exactly the opposite direction. I think the perception was wrong in the first place, because I don't believe that even the idea of the Communist Party losing any significant power at all was always false. But nevertheless, it's become particularly open under the question of Xi Jinping, and everything is becoming re-centralised through the party. I think the surprise in the West is not due to the changes in China. I think it's due to the fact that the Western analysts were wrong about what was the dynamic in China. They misunderstood the situation.
A quick review of what has happened over the past 3 decades or so since the end of the Cultural Revolution would be very helpful in enlightening our Western audience about the latest evolution in the party building. For example, many, maybe very similar to your analysis, many in the West would argue what we have done is to decentralize, I mean to depoliticize, if not to decentralize the government in deepening our reform. However, with Mr. Xi Jinping taking the highest office, what he does is to strengthen ruthlessly the power and the strength of the ruling party, the biggest of its kind in the world.
Well, you can see the Western perception of China is in the broader context what in the West we consider the political systems analysis. You see basically this group of competitive multi-party democracies, primarily in the West. Those are stable, and many of those multi-party systems are not stable in third world countries. And then you have other group of countries which are highly concentrated. China belongs to that group. Centralized state power, one-party domination. Over the years, the question is, will the one party fix its own problems? We see the Chinese Communist Party reflected on great Cultural Revolution and previous historical experiences, and now coming to a severe anti-corruption campaign. So there's a self-renewal efforts going on within the Chinese Communist Party. The question in the Western political science and studies of China is, you got tremendous amount of prosperity over the past 3 or 4 decades. Will the party continue to lead that as a primary driver, saying it can deliver the good to the general public, and therefore the legitimacy of the party is continuously being endorsed by the general public? Will that happen, or something else has to happen, either within the party or beyond the one-party system? So now, in this context, it's interesting to observe the latest 6th Plenum about the intra-party democracy, about the new norms, restricted, strict governance of the party. All these, I think, is aimed at self-continuous renewal.
Probably, from the perspective of the Chinese Communist Party, nothing goes wrong with the absolute and unconditional party leadership. But the efficiency of such a leadership, the effectiveness and efficiency of such a leadership of the partisanship must be greatly improved. Hence, Mr. Xi Jinping has been established through a plenum discussion as the core leader of the Central Committee. What does that mean for you, John?
Well, everything will be determined by whether the right policies are adopted or not. In the end, if the right policies are adopted, things will be successful. If the wrong policies are adopted, then things will be unsuccessful. And it doesn't matter what will be done on the question of institutionalization or anything.
But then what do you make of the policy-making process here within the party and within?
Well, I can make a comparison. I lived in Russia from 1992 to 2000. It was very well summed up for me by one of my friends, who said that by the end, the Soviet Communist Party surrounded itself with an atmosphere of solidity. That is, it merely was told what it already believed, and the only thing it wanted to be told was what it already believed. My experience of the interaction with the Communist Party of China is that is not the case. The Communist Party of China has many views, because I know I have Western friends and Chinese friends. It approaches people with very, very many different views. I do not know the processes by which the decisions are taken, but what I do know is that a huge effort is made into getting a very wide range of views as inputs into that decision-making process, and that is completely different to, for example, the Soviet Communist Party.
What do you make of Daniel Bell's point of view about meritocracy? And he says the vertical meritocracy and vertical democratic meritocracy is the governance of the Communist Party of China, and that's the core of the issue.
Well, Daniel Bell is a very distinguished scholar. He's from Canada, and his views on China is very unique. It's been discussed in the political science circles over recent years, and in a sense also controversial. I think Daniel...
Is that because he's controversial? Is that because he defends?
It's been perceived that Daniel Bell and his theory maybe is defending the current Chinese political system. And Daniel himself, I know him well, defends against that kind of view. And I agree, and I read his works and know he's not saying he's writing something to justify a Chinese political system as it is. Meritocracy to him, based on the Chinese model as it evolves, what he calls as an ideal type. In the Western political theory, we know ideal types. There's multi-party democracy is an ideal type. The question raised by the fall of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s is the thesis of the end of history thesis. That means we're done. Everything else failed. Only the Western-style democracy is in place. And Daniel Bell's theory basically saying, wait a minute, there are other forms of political system in existence, maybe just as effective or potentially as an ideal type, could be as a model and narrative-based Chinese evolution of political system in recent decades as an ideal type, but is not a status quo definition or defense of the status quo. So it's interesting that he's saying if you have a different version of democracy, here you have one. China might be working towards that ideal type. In that ideal type, the corruption has to be curbed. The party has to be following the law and order, and all that stuff has to be into that ideal type. Right?
And I'm afraid part of the broad considerations and backdrop against which Back to Asia was engineered by the Obama administration actually comes from their concerns that the Chinese mode of development may threaten to challenge the, not only geopolitically the primacy of Americans in the Pacific Ocean, but also their lifestyle and their values, what the Americans and what the United States stand for. And therefore, for example, meritocracy, consultative democracy might be a very convincing alternative to the electoral democracy in the West. Look at the failure in Ukraine. Maybe in Thailand, if you look at the clashes between red shirt protesters and yellow shirt protesters, Arab Spring, so on and so forth. Even in the Philippines, politics brought into the core until President Duterte comes into office, vowing to take a war against not only drugs, but also other kinds of crime. So democracy itself is good, but when it's planted or transplanted in underdeveloped country, it could be a big problem instead of being part of the. What do you think of such a comparison between China and other young democracies, or if not very bad democracy?
I don't think it got anything to do with the ideology, the turn to Asia. I think it got to do with the fact that China, if it continues its present economic course, will become a more powerful country than the United States. And if you read, for example, the Council on Foreign Policy reports on China, it's very simple. They want the United States to remain the #1 country in the world. The problem is that China has 4 times the population of the United States. China is, if the United States is to remain the most powerful country in the world, the Chinese people have to be poor. Therefore, the goal of the United States was to block the economic development of China. That's what the Trans-Pacific Partnership was about. That's what all their other economic policies. It's got nothing to do with their visions on democracy or that. America has always supported either dictatorships or democracy, depending on whether they agree with the United States or not. I mean, it can support a feudal monarchy in Saudi Arabia while simultaneously proclaiming universal human rights. There's no logic to that at all.
Our friends in Saudi Arabia would be very angry with you.
Well, I'm sorry that they are. I'm not going to apologize to them for telling the truth.
Okay, thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Professor Wenran Jiang with the University of Alberta and John Ross, a senior research fellow with the Chongyang Institute of Financial Studies with the Renmin University of China. We are discussing the outcome of the 6th plenum of the 18th Central Committee of the CPC. We'll be back in a few minutes. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party drew both praise for the economic miracles it oversaw over the past 3 decades. Those who criticize the CPC point out, look, it has a central government, it has a central authority, it's everything against what they believe in the West. And those who praise would say it can be compared to the Singaporean model with the central government and the strong man to guarantee efficiency. So what do you think of the China story?
Well, the Chinese story, going back the earlier discussion about whether there is a model. One way is you cannot have a model unless you have some achievements. And so now the question in the West asked about the China model is, will it become an alternative to the typical style Western democracy? We just talked about US democracy, which is literally a two-part dictatorship in some form because the established interest groups really control both parties. And it's amazing to see Donald Trump, himself a billionaire, can be raised up to be against the system. So whether the Chinese Communist Party in this case or the party that dominant, such as in the case of Singapore, Malaysia and others, who can actually continue to deliver goods to the general public, and therefore you don't have the anger that people rise up and against the establishment. I think that is the pressing issue for all the major dominant party states that has to consider without a competitive multi-party in turn kind of in power kind of system situation, right?
The issue of great urgency for me personally, gentlemen, and I want both of you to give me your insightful comments. Do you believe there are structural contradictions between economic efficiency and social justice? It seems these two things go against each other. If you want to emphasize very rapid economic expansion, then justice could be compromised somehow, because you cannot afford to have endless policy hearings, either in the Congress or, to be always brought under scrutiny by the media, the opposition forces, or whatever watchdogs. If you are put under draconian, severe scrutiny, you can hardly move forward. You have to make sure he's satisfied, he's pleased. If you want to please everybody, you please nobody. And you can hardly construct 1 single inch of the high-speed railway. Similar examples could be easily raised in California, in Berlin, where with the end of the Cold War, they've been talking about the construction of an airport, but nothing has yet come true yet at this moment. It's only because there are debates, parliamentary hearings about whether this will undermine the individual liberty, the well-being of the citizens, the electorate, so on and so forth. Opposition parties are every time around the clock, standby, supervising, watching out. So what do you think of the structural contradictions, if any?
Yeah, but it's two different things, because the terms used were social justice, and that you're talking about political rights. There's a total difference. The empirical evidence is that those economies which grew very fast indeed, for example, the Asian tigers or Japan, have very flat income structures. I don't mean by that there's not inequality in them, obviously there is. But compared to the United States and other countries, the social inequality is rather small. The political rights are very limited in them, it's true. So they're two totally different questions. Can you have rapid economic development without political rights? Certainly, there's lots of examples of that. Is a great social injustice economic deficient? The answer is no.
Wen Ranjiang, look at the rights and appeal from the middle class, which is obviously growing in size and in power in a highly developed economy. Political science in the West says clearly, with the development of the economy, you're going to have the olive-shaped society with the growing army of the middle class watching out for the behavior of a strong government. And they would say, hey, we'll go to court whenever we feel unhappy. Is that the case with the middle class in developed nations?
Well, the issue you're talking about is whether democracy or a more centralized state or one-party dominant structure would be more efficient in facilitating economic development. I'm from Canada. I can see over the years that multi-party democracies, which I think in Canada has a very good system, it does slow down the economic development. And at the same time, we look at going back to 1950s, 60s, 70s, the East Asian model started from Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, and then China, you have more of the more party-dominant or potentially strong states in this part of the world that driven a lot faster economic growth.
But I'm afraid the price we pay is a rampant corruption.
Well, you have rapid
because you have the
corruption.
absolute power to oversee the rapid expansion of the economy.
The question is, where is the line of supervision by the public for the very strong state which can bulldozer and can damage the environment, for example, at the expense of economic development?
But I simply wouldn't agree with you. I spent from 1992 to 2000. You had in the Soviet Union, it's true, a problem of corruption. Significant problem of corruption, but it was nothing compared to the corruption which came once you had the privatization of the economy and the overthrow of the Communist Party. I mean, the whole country was robbed, and hundreds of billions of dollars were taken out of the country, and people seized assets worth, billions and billions of dollars for nothing. The corruption inside the former Soviet Union was tiny compared to the corruption which came after 1992. So I just don't accept, therefore, that the communist system, will it produce corruption? Is there corruption in China? Evidently, everybody agrees there's corruption in China, but it's not of anything like the scale of 1992.
In the case of Russia, they used to have a very strong oligarchs. Here in China, we have a very strong interest groups. Now, in both cases, don't you think we need a strong man to exercise effective leadership so that the impact of interest groups, or in the Russia case, oligarchs, could be mitigated, could be undermined effectively, and to guarantee social justice for ordinary folks?
There are a lot of people actually arguing, like Putin is very strong. He put things in checks. But are there oligarchs in Russia today? Absolutely it is. Maybe not as bad as in the 1990s.
So long as they stay away from politics, it's okay for Putin. Is that your point?
But the question now is, that strong man or strong woman, does it have any systemic check on that person? If you go stray, what happens? So we're assuming the super quality of an individual over the system, or are we looking at developing a system? I think it goes back to the core of the discussion of the Chinese Communist Party's own organizational issues today. Do you trust a more entrenched law and order that nobody is above the law as the normal procedure for society to move forward? Or we're saying we happen to have a great group of leaders or a great leader, and then we depend on that person. So we have experiences before.
Here is a deliverable coming out of a recent decision by the CPC Central Committee that a pilot program be established for the Beijing municipal government, Zhejiang and the Shanxi provinces, where you're going to combine the powerful discipline inspection committee of the CPC with the supervisory committee of the CPC. They used to be independent, free from each other's intervention, but by putting them into the same mechanism, they could collectively exercise oversight, and they would be put on the same level with the provincial government, the provincial court, and provincial procuratorate, and therefore hopefully effective oversight could be exercised by the newly established mechanism. What do you think of this vision? Will it be a new major step in the correct direction in reforming the political institutions? Because we've been talking about how to institutionalize the anti-graft campaign.
Well, I'm studying it. I read it. I'm a little bit, frankly speaking, I'm still puzzled by the setup. Here you go. In a normal society, as China has evolved, you used to have no laws. Criminal laws established, constitution is being interpreted, many criminal system, judicial system is being set up over the decades. And yes, there is a separate path by the Communist Party Central Disciplinary Committee, and then when they put the corrupt officials into a party system, and then they will put them into a disciplinary hearing, isolate them, they confess, and then they've been put into justice system. Now we're looking at a combination of the party system and the justice system. I don't know how it works. Is the party above the justice system, or the justice system subject to the party, or the two are equally institutionalized?
In Chinese, we have what is called 依法执政. The Communist Party should rule by the law.
And
in the spirit
it's
of
not
the
above the
Constitution.
law, if that is the case. And I think it's been established over the years.
Here
Are
is
we
a
saying now
consensus.
the party is going above the law or
Scholars-
equal to the law?
Scholars, intellectuals, and elites, so to speak, in China have been discussing this issue as to whether the party is above the law. Well, they say, and there's vaguely a kind of a consensus shared by different social groups, be they come from the overseas returned scholars or the homegrown scholars. They agree. Once the legislation is or has been drafted with the help of the party, then the party must maneuver within the established legislative framework. If you find the newly established legislation incompatible with the party leadership, you have to do the legislation again.
Yeah, but that is exactly the transitions from what was the type of dictatorship. Stalin could sign an order and you were executed. There was no legislation, there was no process at all. You go shoot this person.
Everything
right,
is done by
and
rule by decree. I mean, this is a...
No, but that's not what you
probably.
have. But Stalin virtually didn't have a decree; he just ordered you to be shot, right? And that was it, right? If the Communist Party of China wishes to go through certain procedures, now it has to do it through the form of law. These laws may be good or bad, but you do not have a situation, as far as I can see, in which case people can take arbitrary decisions defined by no process, whatever, which certainly was the system which existed in Stalinist Russia, for example.
Well, compared with the Conservative Party of Britain, which has existed for more than 300 years. The Democratic Party of the US has survived for over 200 years, and the French Socialist Party only 100 years. But the Communist Party of China is only 95 years old. Does it mean that we should give them a chance, we should give them more time to do experiments and to review its own vulnerability so that China could possibly navigate its own course independently without copying necessarily Western patterns?
Well, you raised all those parties and their numbers, but they're in a different context. All the parties in the United States, in Britain, in France, they are functioning in a multi-competitive party states, and they take turns. These parties don't sit in power forever. They go off and they come on. The Chinese Communist Party is a different situation since 1949.
What we call consultative democracy.
Yeah, so therefore now the question is, if there is a so-called emerging China model, that we don't know what that yet is, whether it will be self-regulating and self-adjusting, because within the party there might be functions, there will be dynamics to make it better, but it definitely cannot be just simply compared with the multi-party competitive democracies,
no
right?
parallel comparison whatsoever should be drawn. With that, we come to the end of this discussion about perhaps what we call political reform of the existing institutions through the latest deliverable, that is a parallel organization to supervise governments at different levels to fight corruption. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.